We got to stay quiet before security comes in and tells us that we're not allowed to do this. For those of you who find it to be a hassle standing, or you should feel free to sit, we have overflow rooms in room 6304 or room 5109, where you can watch on screens if that is better. So otherwise, we'll just get started. My name is Gary Wilder. I'm the director of the Committee on Globalization and Social Change at the Graduate Center, and here we are. It is my pleasure to be hosting this timely event organized by the CUNY FSJP, Faculty and Staff for Justice in Palestine. I want to start by thanking This was a collective effort. A lot of people chipped in, and we are all grateful for each other. And we are all especially grateful for the hard work of Alex Werner, the program assistant, for handling so many of the logistics for this event. Like Passover, why on this night? On this night of all nights, unlike other nights, I think it is especially important to name each of the many groups that agreed to co-sponsor this event. These include the CUNY Graduate Center programs in anthropology, art history, critical psychology, earth and environmental studies, English, history, Middle Eastern studies, and theater and performance, the Center for the Humanities, the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics, the Center for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity, the CUNY Academy, the Institute for Research on the African Diaspora in the Americas and the Caribbean, the Middle East and Middle Eastern American Center, Hunter College's Arabic program and departments of Women and Gender Studies and Sociology, and PSC CUNY's Academic Freedom Committee and the Anti-Racism Committee. This list makes me proud to be a CUNY professor. So too, this large turnout, many more people signed up who can't get in the room here. Who would have thought that co-sponsoring a public discussion of an academic book at the CUNY Graduate Center could possibly be a significant act? But semi-open spaces like these are disappearing every week. As we know, academic freedom is in mortal peril. It has never been more important for everyone with a stake in the university as a space of relative intellectual freedom to step up, link arms, and refuse the Palestine exception, to stand together to protect what we have long taken for granted. Because the university as a space of open and substantive intellectual exchange is being eroded in ways that are both granular and inexorable. Every instance of holding the line and doing what we do matters, however insignificant it may seem. You know how it goes. Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. No member of the academic community can possibly remain indifferent to what is now unfolding with remarkable speed, force, and impunity. If you think this repression does not concern you, you are mistaken. But you know that because you're here. So under these conditions, something as banal and low risk as allowing a program's name to be associated with a talk like this matters. And so too should we be concerned with the programs in this building that decline to do so. This is one of the many lessons we can learn from Maya Win's brave and important book, Towers of Ivory and Steel. I will leave the discussion to Tony, Tarek, and Maya, but here I'll just note my own uncanny experience while reading the book. I did not only learn about the many ways that Israeli universities over the past several decades have been scenes of intense ideological justification, academic repression, and carceral regulation and punishment. I also saw clearly a precedent and blueprint for so much of what has been unfolding across the US universities over this past year. I felt like I was reading about here and now, and of course, this is no accident. Maya Wind explains that she wrote this book as a response to a call for people worldwide to enact BDS. In turn, we may read her book as a call to which we need to respond in every possible way, partly by reckoning with our own complicities and assuming our responsibilities on whatever front of the struggle we happen to find ourselves. I certainly do not want to suggest that the university has ever been a space free of interest, power, and repression. Indeed, it has always been worldly and messy and unsavory. No one taught us more about such implication than Edward Said, but Said also pointed out that compared to most places in the world, quote, the American university constitutes a relatively utopian space grounded in an academic freedom that must be defended. To this end, Said called on scholars to exercise what he called their intellectual vocation in ways that pointed beyond parochial specialization and professionalization. He called this acting like a citizen, acting like a human being. Maintaining a healthy skepticism of authority, questioning consensus and orthodoxy, these are all his terms. Remaining independent and defiant, another one of his terms, in matters of human suffering, as he put it. Above all, for Said, the intellectual vocation requires scholars to enter the public space in order to what he called take a position, assume responsibility, and be answerable. This is the spirit in which he reminded the graduates of the American University in Cairo in 1999 that, quote, the university cannot survive as a real university if its governance and teaching mission become the objects of scrutiny and direct interference by powers outside the university. So that too is a call to which we must respond. So on to tonight's event. Tony Alessandrini is going to moderate a discussion between Maya and Tarek, who I will briefly introduce. Anthony Alessandrini, our dear Tony, teaches English at Kingsborough Community College and Middle Eastern Studies at the Graduate Center, where he was also a member of the Committee on Globalization and Social Change. He told me not to mention his books, but I will say that he is the author of Frantz Fanon and the Future of Cultural Politics and Decolonize Multiculturalism. He did say to mention that he is a longtime Palestine solidarity activist, which is true. Tarek Ismail is associate professor at CUNY School of Law, where he co-directs the Family Law Practice Clinic and is counsel to CUNY's Law Creating Law Enforcement Accountability and Responsibility, or CLEAR project. And he said, stop there, but he is keeping us safe, and we are very, very grateful. Maya Wind is a President's and Andrew W. Mellon postdoctoral fellow at the University of California, Riverside. Her scholarship broadly investigates how settler societies and global systems of militarism and policing are sustained. Her book, Towers of Ivory and Steel, is the topic of our conversation today, as it relates also to campus organizing at this moment around these issues here. We are very grateful to have you all here. Before we start, I am just going to let Rupal Oza, our colleague and comrade and a professor at Hunter College and the Graduate Center, say a few words about CUNY FSJP. Thank you, Rupal.
Hi, everyone. I will be brief because you're not here to see me. Okay, so CUNY Faculty for Justice, Faculty and Staff for Justice in Palestine is a democratic and plural collective of CUNY faculty and staff who stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people in their struggle for liberation. We define faculty and staff broadly to include persons involved in making education possible at CUNY, including tenured and non-tenured faculty and full and part-time faculty, staff, and graduate student employees. CUNY FSJP affiliates with the national network, Faculty for Justice in Palestine, that opposes Israeli occupation and apartheid, as well as the systemic suppression of critical voices in solidarity with Palestine in the US Academy and beyond. We aim for CUNY FSJP to be an inclusive collective for staff, faculty across CUNY campuses, regardless of rank, employment status, acting as an autonomous chapter of the national network in alliance with existing Palestine solidarity groups in CUNY and across the city. Members of CUNY faculty and staff who affirm our principles are welcome to join our chapter of FSJP to help plan and organize actions. Flyers for FSJP are on the table right outside with a handy dandy QR code. Look at that. Let me just end by saying two things. As we say in South Asia, Inqilab Zindabad, may long live the revolution, and free Palestine. Please join me.
Hey, coming in. Oh, is it on? Jack, that's on. Oh, now it's on. Can you hear me? That was nice how that came flying in like that. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm Tony Alessandrini. You're not here to hear me either. So, but I get to moderate this conversation, and I'm really thrilled. So, Maya Wind and Tarek Ismail, thank you so much for being here. This is of course is Maya Wind's amazing book. Many of you know it. Maya and Tarek both were very clear they really wanted this to be kind of an organizing conversation and sort of to talk about the context, the situation, the struggles we face as organizers. So, a lot of our questions are going to go there. We're going to keep the sort of initial discussion relatively short so we can have a ton of time for open discussion questions. So we'll move out there. And for folks who are standing, we apologize. This is what counts as a big room at CUNY. Sorry for the lack of chairs. We do have an overflow room, so if you're like super uncomfortable, there is a place where you can go watch it live streamed if you'd like to sit. Yeah, or you give up your seat for another. Yeah, it's just true solidarity. Okay, and I had wanted to say just really quick, we are, as many of you know, coming to you from occupied and unceded Lenape land. We stand and remember and celebrate elders past and present who have guarded and sanctified this land, and all those who are struggling against settler colonialism everywhere. And I just want to add to Gary's list of people to thank Gary himself and the kind of amazing leadership he's provided through not just for this event, but through the Committee on Globalization and Social Change. Best damn conversation in like the city. It's a really precious space. So the kinds of spaces that you're describing, spaces of struggle, that's one of them, and we're grateful. Okay, enough from me. Just to start with, so a lot of us here are really familiar, of course, with Towers of Ivory and Steel. It's my well-thumbed copy. But for those who aren't, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little background about how the book came to be and maybe some of the sources and scholars and anything you'd like to say about the book, just as a kind of opener.
Can you all hear me in the back? A little louder. Yeah, I'm gonna try to position it. How's this? Better? So first, just to say, to reiterate my thanks to all the sponsors and particularly to CUNY faculty and staff for Justice in Palestine for your crucial organizing, as well as all the students here at CUNY for everything that you have done this last year and your leadership. And specifically, both Tony and Gary, you've offered us in your own thinking and writing over many years. You've informed my thinking, and I know the thinking of many of us in this room, and that is preparing us for this moment. So thank you for that. And it really is a true honor to share this space with Tarek, who, just to say, I have been organizing. I first met Tarek when we were both organizers at Students for Justice in Palestine at Columbia 14 years ago, and I've been learning from him ever since. So I'm so grateful to be in conversation, truly. So yeah, just as a way to maybe, for those who are less familiar with these topics of the complicity of Israeli academia, maybe just a sort of a little bit of by way of introduction. The starting point for this book was really something that should be familiar to everyone in this room, which is a particular Western consensus, as it were, about the Israeli Academy. We have been told, and I'm sure I don't need to say it in this room, but we have been told for so long in the Western academic context, specifically in the United States system of higher education, that Israeli universities are bastions of liberalism and democracy. And in fact, they have been for so long held up as exceptional in the broader landscape of the Middle East. And we need only think to the myriad of programming that our own institutions, of course, including CUNY, that are maintained between our system of higher education and Israeli universities, funding opportunities, study abroad programs, joint research ventures. I mean, really, the list is long, and we're all familiar with it. And this is really because we are told, right, that unlike their counterparts, their Palestinian counterparts or their Arab counterparts or other counterparts more broadly in the region, Israeli universities are exceptionally free, which is why they get all of these privileges. They've been singled out, if you will, for a very long time for special treatment. And the endurance of this Western consensus is particularly striking, I think, given that for over 2 decades now, Palestinians have been repeatedly calling it into question, So the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, PACB, first issued its call to boycott the Israeli university system on the basis of what they called at the time its complicity in Israel's system of oppression against Palestinians. This call was issued to us, to all of us in the academic community, and specifically in the Western academic community, back in 2004. And yet, this image of the Israeli university system, despite these Palestinian calls, has really been for too long uninterrupted, and the narrative about Israeli universities has been framed to us by Israeli academics themselves and by these institutions themselves, and they have just been taken at face value. And so I really came to research and to write this book precisely to answer this question posed by Palestinian activists, scholars, civil society organizations 20 years ago now, right? Which is really quite simply, are Israeli universities complicit in the violation of Palestinian rights? And what I found, as you can probably surmise by the title, no spoilers, is that Israeli universities are deeply implicated in Israeli settler colonialism, in Israel's system of apartheid, and now in genocide. And really, Israeli universities can only be understood as settler universities, I think. And here, of course, I'm following indigenous scholars of education who for decades have been theorizing the settler university. But what I mean by that in this context is really quite simply that these universities are reproducing and are central to the infrastructure that reproduces Israeli society as a settler society. And we can kind of look at different aspects of this that I kind of trace in the book, but it begins, of course, with the land and in the ways that Israeli universities themselves were very strategically and specifically placed to promote the Israeli project of Judaization, right? The twin project of interrupting Palestinian territorial contiguity, shrinking lands in Palestinian possession, and transferring lands from Palestinian to Jewish Israeli ownership. So they really have been serving as regional pillars of demographic engineering from their very founding, to the ways that they serve the Israeli military and security state, not only by offering tailored degree programs, not only by conducting joint research with Israeli military industries that try their weapons on Palestinians before selling them abroad as battle-proven, but also the ways that really dominant paradigms and entire disciplines developed in and through deep collaborations with the Israeli state to aid in the project of Palestinian subjugation. So these are just some sort of highlights from some of the things that I was looking at. And again, this book is really just meant to substantiate a call by Palestinians and research by Palestinians that has been out there for over 20 years, but we in the West have really failed to engage adequately.
No, that's great. Thank you. And this really follows on that. And I want to bring Tarek in. And I'll just add, I met Tarek first, I think in 2017, when he came out to Kingsborough, where I teach out in Brooklyn, to do a Know Your Rights session for students who, it was the first time around with Trump, and were rightly kind of terrified about what the future brought. And I think of him as someone who's constantly moving quickly from one place. Every time I see him, he's moving quickly from one place to another, usually to help someone. So thank you for sitting down for 2 hours to be in conversation with us. We're so grateful. So, and I think this really follows on what you were just saying. So, I mean, a lot of times when we talk about the complicity of Israeli and U.S. universities with genocide, scholasticide, I mean, just to draw on your point, were developed by Palestinian scholars. We tend to emphasize the more material aspects. We talk about direct support for the military. We talk about collaboration with weapons manufacturers. And your book has a ton to say about that. We're going to talk about that, obviously, tonight. But you also talk about what you call epistemic occupation, right? The way that knowledge production and the ways that Israeli and U.S. institutions limit it, which is what Gary was pointing to, directly contribute to genocide. So I was wondering, could you both talk a little bit about some of this connection between knowledge production and limitation of knowledge production institutionally as a direct part of institutional complicity in scholasticide and genocide?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think some of us, even those of us doing critical work in the university, sometimes inadequately, I think, address the material conditions that make knowledge production possible. And I think that that's something that we have to attend to more and to take more seriously. But so think, in that vein, taking seriously our institutions as sites of knowledge production, one of the things that I really was looking at is how academic disciplines develop their scholarly fields, expand their fields through these deep ties to the state, and how they subordinate their research agendas to the requirements of Israeli apartheid. So there are so many. This is really endemic. I could have written about a number of disciplines, but just to give maybe some examples and kind of link it to the present moment with the genocide. You know, one discipline that I was looking at is archaeology, and how the discipline of archaeology, and here, of course, I'm following a teacher of mine, Nadia Hajj, who has written about this, decades ago, but kind of building on her work, looking at how archaeology in the Israeli Academy really only developed through illegal military occupation of Palestinian territory, and it was the conditions of possibility for it was the systemic looting of Palestinian artifacts, and of course, illegal excavations, right, prohibited very explicitly by international law in occupied Palestinian territory. And the discipline really served to substantiate Israeli claims to the entirety of historic Palestine, to erase Palestinian and Muslim history, of course, and to erase Palestinians in the present through the dispossession of entire Palestinian communities under the aegis of archaeological excavations, and through the very selective curating of historic sites. And, just earlier in 2023, Isra University in Gaza had a very rich collection of archival artifacts that were taken, seized, looted by the Israeli military before Israel blew it up. And those artifacts are now in Israeli possession, made available for the use of researchers and the broader Israeli public. Middle East studies is another important one to note. The discipline in the Israeli Academy of Middle East Studies really developed at the intersection of the military, the security state, and the university. And this discipline has become and has continued to serve a critical site for the state to hone regional linguistic expertise to better rule and subjugate Palestinians. We've seen over the last year not only how these departments are actually training soldiers that are themselves in the intelligence corps, creating target banks for Palestinians in Gaza, but also how these so-called experts are using their platforms and academic credentials to call for the annihilation of Gaza, and through also what has been termed the general's plan, right, which what we are seeing now of ethnic cleansing of the northern Gaza Strip, and the designating of all Palestinians who remain there as targets for killing. And of course, legal studies and ethics, these are other sort of linked fields that developed, and for a long time, and of course, Noor Arakat, Lisa Hajar, others have written about this, very important work to look at. But how these disciplines have for decades, particularly since the Second Palestinian Intifada, developed shall we say, innovative interpretations of international humanitarian law and laws of war, not only to sanction and to legitimate what we have all long known, but what the ICJ recently made official and explicit, which is an illegal military occupation, but also a whole host of war crimes and tactics and doctrines, from targeted assassinations to new forms of torture to disproportionate use of force against civilian populations. So when we come to grapple with the utter impunity with which Israel has been allowed to operate for over a year now, we must also look to Israeli universities and to understand how faculties of law had a very clear role in facilitating it. And of course, we also saw how faculties of law mobilized very explicitly and immediately, in fact, to not only manipulate evidence of genocidal intent, but to offer legal counsel to the team to thwart the case brought by South Africa to the ICJ. So that's the question of what kinds of epistemologies thrive in the Israeli Academy. And to the second question, I'll just speak to that briefly before turning it over to Tarek. But I think it's no less important, and the second part of the book kind of turns to that, which is it's not just which knowledge is allowed or is produced in the Israeli Academy, but also which epistemologies and which knowledge is disallowed. And this is where we look at specifically, I think one of the most clear illustrations of this that really tells the whole story about what kinds of epistemology is disallowed. And here I just want to begin by saying first that, again, there is a rich body of scholarly work produced by Palestinian scholars, both in Palestinian universities, but also in Israeli universities themselves, that have for decades been writing about Palestinian epistemology under the constraints of Zionist hegemony, and also the experiences of Palestinian students. And broadly, I've found that this research, some of it's in Arabic and Hebrew, but a large portion of it is in English, published in peer-reviewed journals and presses coming out of Europe and North America. Broadly, I have to say this research is not read. So I cite a lot of it. I encourage, and I'm happy to always give citations. I really encourage us all to really be taking that scholarship seriously and integrating it into our syllabi and engaging with it. But I think when we're trying to understand also how it is possible that Israel is now carrying out a campaign of ethnic cleansing that has even surpassed that of the Nakba. One of the ways that this has been facilitated is in the fact that the Israeli public has been very intentionally been kept ignorant about the 48 Nakba, right? And again, universities have had a central role in this. And you see the ways in which Palestinian scholars primarily, who have been trying to write about the Nakba, to teach about the Nakba, how this has been made untenable in the Israeli Academy. And we see this also with students, particularly, and we see this in particular in the last year, right, where Palestinian students who are mobilizing to educate their peers and to not only to protest the genocide, but to also place this genocide in the context of the ongoing Nakba, the ways in which they are punished very, very severely. And this has, of course, a longer history going back decades in the Israeli Academy, but now the Israeli university administrations are actively collaborating very directly with the Shin Bet and the Israeli police to call them to arrest these students from their own campuses, to subject them to interrogation and detention. So this is, I think, that when we think about the two sides of which epistemologies which knowledge is produced and which epistemologies are foreclosed in the Israeli Academy, I think this is what we're thinking about.
It's great to be here with you all. I'm going to take a photo of y'all and pass it along to my colleagues at the law school and encourage them to come out here more often too. It's great to be here, and it's such a beautiful turnout. They would really be happy to see the energy in the room. I guess because my knowledge is especially perhaps restricted to the legal academy, that's where I'm going to focus some of my response to the question. Not that you stole my thunder, Maya, but I think there are two things we see going on in the legal academy that go to sort of the knowledge production that you're talking about, Tony, or that you asked about. One is kind of perversely linked to the lionization, almost the fetishization of the law that we see here in the United States with, the notorious RBG shirts and the like, that sort of moves to the Israeli Legal Academy and then makes its way back here. So you see sort of the leading lights of the Israeli Legal Academy, and therefore the Israeli bench, become leading lights here in the United States, welcomed on the highest of perches at the most sort of revered legal institutions across the country, their opinions and legal opinions also getting laundered through that process as bastions of sort of liberalism in the truest sense. So, Aharon Barak writes a torture decision in the 2000s, and the Americans Legal Academy sort of goes nuts about this. People who are critical of George W. Bush at the time saying, this is how we should do it, right? When we're thinking about torture, we need to turn to Israel to think about how we handle the problem of terrorism. And that process, and this gets to the second point that I would make here, boomerangs, such that the way that we start to, in the United States, process the question of quote unquote terrorism looks a lot like the way that it's processed in the Israeli Legal Academy and in the Israeli courts. So, for example, a pop quiz. In 1969, and I know this from a white paper written by Darrell Lee and released by the Center for Constitutional Rights and Palestine Legal. In 1969, the word terrorism appeared in the United States Code for the first time. It was used in an effort to limit funding to a particular United Nations agency. Which agency would you guess that was? UNRWA, right? The United Nations Relief and Works Agency, since 1969 at the very least, has been a target of the United States Congress. And that's because we've seen this boomerang effect where understandings of the law as they are developed in the Israeli Academy and in the Israeli courts come back and infect, or you can use another word, whatever word you want to use, intermingle with the way that the American legal system and American legal academy processes the problems. And that has a lot to do with what Maya was talking about in terms of our sort of understanding of international norms and how we handle or exceptionalize certain situations, which the law doesn't clearly make exceptions for, but the exceptions are invented oftentimes in the Israeli Legal Academy and then exported to the American context. On limitations of knowledge production, I mean, y'all will be quite cognizant of how knowledge production has been limited here at CUNY, for example, but I'll sort of read it back to you so maybe you can see it in that light. You know, the governor ordered an inquiry into anti-Semitism at the law school. As a consequence of that order, the former chief judge of the New York Court of Appeals, Jonathan Lippman, did a vast investigation. Many of you will have heard about it. But at the law school, for example, Judge Lippman came and asked to speak to certain faculty, and those faculty, to the one, had expressed their positions vis-a-vis the BDS movement, let's say, and they were not critical of the BDS movement in the way that Judge Lippman would like to be. So they wanted to talk to those people. Judge Lippman came and asked, or his team asked to speak to people who put on certain events. I had hosted an event called The United Nations and the Question of Palestine on a book authored by Ardim Sayas. That book was worthy of inquiry. That talk was worthy of inquiry by Judge Lippman. This is the kind of thing that an anti-Semitism inquiry is looking into at the school. So in terms of the kinds of things that leads to then, right, we have a report put out by that team, which says something like, you know, academic freedom is real, freedom of expression is real, and the report says, but the CUNY also has academic freedom. And so, for example, when certain faculty or students pass resolutions endorsing BDS, the chancellor has come out and said that he does not support BDS, right? And so the messaging that comes out of this sort of inquiry is one which is bereft of a power analysis, where the institution speaks through the chancellor and really lays the hammer down in ways that our students are experiencing. They define, for example, as disruptive of academic conduct any encampment at the law school as a matter of policy, at the school writ large as a matter of policy. And so there are no more encampments. And so that sort of limitation we see over and over again across the country.
Stop turning this on. That was great. I love the way you both sort of came at both the material and I was thinking, I was thinking as you were, especially as you were speaking, because I kind of asked the question in terms of scholasticide, you know, the kind of systematic destruction of educational institutions, but I was also thinking the term that the Palestinian Feminist Collective and others use, which is sophicide, right? The kind of destruction of like an indigenous way of thought, which is related but different, right? I mean, I think that's some of it. And then also I have to say, I was thinking of this as I was reading your book also, a piece that Stephen Saleta wrote called Literary Criticism During Genocide, where he sort of like, you know, we think about, I'm a literary critic, like we think about like, how could our work possibly help? And he's like, well, maybe let's start with the question of how does it hurt? Like, what are the bad things our work potentially could do? And that's easy to answer. And if we start there, then maybe if we do the opposite of it, like, so I mean, there's a lot of ways in which your book. So, I mean, I think this really, so I mean, the next kind of issue we sort of want to think about, is already on the table, right? Given that we're having this conversation here on stolen land, could you both talk a little bit about how we should compare the settler university? You were like, the university in Israel is a settler university. And I think for a lot of us here, it's like we would make a similar analysis of US universities. What are the commonalities? What are the differences when we think about how to resist settler colonialism in different sites?
I think that is a crucial question, and first to say, I full agreement that the Israeli universities are not exceptional in that regard. They are part of a long tradition of the settler university. Certainly, I think if we think specifically to settler states established under the aegis of the British Empire, of which arguably Israeli universities are also in that direct tradition, universities built on lands cleared through genocide and indigenous dispossession, in the context of North America and other places too, built with the spoils of the slave trade. So certainly in that regard, Israeli universities are part of that longer tradition. But I do think, and I think it is nonetheless important to kind of attend to some cardinal differences. And the first and most important one that I think bears repeating is that the indigenous communities subject to the violence of the settler university in the Israeli case, the Palestinians, have called for a boycott, right? So that is the most, to my mind, that it begins and ends there, right? Because boycott at the end of the day is not a politics, it's a tactic, right? And Palestinians have identified the boycott as an appropriate tactic for the context of the Israeli Academy, because they've identified the Israeli university system as a pillar of Israel's racial rule, without which the regime cannot sustain itself. And so we have to take that incredibly seriously. And I also always want to remind people of this, that in fact, the call for the academic boycott was the foundational call of the BDS movement, right? So a full year before the BNC, the Boycott National Committee, issued its full call for BDS, PACB had already issued its call for the academic boycott. And so I think all of us, those of us reproducing the academy, whether it's through our tuition or through our labor, we have to take that incredibly seriously, that our peers, our colleagues, both scholars, intellectuals, activists, really identified the Israeli Academy as an appropriate target for boycott before they even called on a whole host of other, corporations, weapons, et cetera. So I think we really have to take that seriously as a starting point, those of us in the university. Another difference I do think, we'll see now with the incoming administration to what extent this will still hold, but I would argue that there is a difference both of degree and of kind between Israeli universities and universities in other settler states here, for example, in terms of the embeddedness and the active participation of these institutions in apartheid. And the last one is really, I think, a lot of us, and I'm sure, Tarek, I'm curious what you would have to say about this. I think we're all feeling a little bit disillusioned with international law this year. But nevertheless, it is a site of struggle, and it has been a site of struggle. And Palestinians in particular waged a long campaign to get international recognition that is now broad and overwhelming, that Israel in the legal sense is a state of apartheid, guilty of the crimes of apartheid. And that designation needs to mean something to us as well. I think, and we saw also with the ICJ ruling on the illegality of the occupation, the academic institutions were explicitly mentioned. And again, I'll let Tarek speak for this more about our legal obligations, but we have actual obligations in that regard. And I think we do need to hold on to not lose sight of that, and that has to be part of our organizing. And I think it's also a question of strategy, right? I think we're at a moment now when, whether we like it or not, we have to speak to liberals in our movement, and that still holds sway with them, right? And so, it's like you have to also. I think no stone can be left unturned at this moment. We are operating in an incredible time of urgency for over a year. And so, if that is a tool that we can use in our arsenal, let us use it.
I want to pick up maybe where Maya left off on the question of sort of what we have to do and what's left before us. We are at a moment now where it feels as though throwing ourselves on the gears is what's left. the machine is turning, and we have the opportunity in these institutions where we work or study to do something about it. And so, sure, I think of to the extent that we want to talk about international law quickly, and I think about a quote from No Separate Justice, Noor Araqat's book, where she talks about Justice for Some, I'm sorry, Noor Araqat's book, where she talks about the law as a sail. And the sail is not loyal to anyone, but politics are the wind that we put into that sail. And whichever way the wind blows, the law can facilitate movement in that direction. So at our academic institutions, in some respects, we have an obligation to hasten that wind along and put wind into the sails that the South African government has developed, the Center for Constitutional Rights developed in their lawsuit, that so many others are developing, and think about what other tools we have at our disposal that are not legal. So the question of sort of how we resist, or differences in how we resist settler colonialism. I mean, to the extent that there has been a call for a boycott put out by Palestinian civil society, there's so many things that we can do organizing here in the U.S. The law school, and we'll talk about this maybe in a little bit, but students at the law school passed a BDS resolution, and the faculty at the law school endorsed that BDS resolution by unanimous consent. Yes. That wasn't popular as far as the administration at CUNY Central was concerned, but it's a fact. And those sorts of campaigns, I think, are campaigns that we might think about running right through the CUNY system. And we'll talk about what implications the BDS executive order has on that sort of move here in a sec. But, spoiler alert, that was passed in 2021, and, I still have a job. So that's something that we can do. There are other things, though, that we might consider thinking about doing. There's legislation now on the books, in Albany, that is designed to think about divesting, or at the very least, cutting the charitable status of organizations that send money to violent settler organizations, or indeed organizations that contribute to genocide. It's called Not on Our Dime. We might think about what we would do as the PSC or other organized bodies to support that sort of legislation if we think it's worthy of that support. We might look into the Israel bonds that we're invested in our retirement portfolios, or any other sorts of investments that we've got, and think about what we might do about those. And that's also a legislative question as well that we might take up at Albany. So there are a lot of things that we might be able to do here in response to that call. And it's not a place where we can afford to be despondent, because there are options for us, and we should exercise the ones that we've got.
Speaking of which, no, that's a fantastic segue. Thank you both so much. And by the way, Tyler, you can tell folks that it's a pretty straight shot from the law school to here, like Queens. Like, it's a pretty pretty easy subway ride. So we should keep in touch.
Can confirm.
We should keep in touch.
Yeah.
But this is great because we're fortunate. We have a couple of our amazing grad school organizers who are going to come talk about this a little bit. But so on the point that sort of just came up. So one of the, I'm going to call it soft repression, like soft versions of repression we keep seeing. When you sort of gave the analogy of like the international law as a sail, I was thinking like administrators feel whose souls I think I've never been able to discern, but they seem very much like similar. It's sort of like, like who's going to sue us and who's going to cause trouble. And, so one thing we keep encountering from university and other administrators is they'll point to the growing number of anti-BDS laws as a reason why institutions can't right? Past the sort of things that you're describing. So here in the building, and we'll hear more about this, the CUNY Grad, the administration has cited a New York State executive order, which, as and you're going to talk about this, is aimed at businesses, not universities, as a reason for overturning and voiding a BDS resolution that was passed with overwhelming support by the Doctoral and Graduate Student Council last month. So clap for that. I will add, since it's close to home for me, last week, the leadership of the Modern Language Association, the largest humanities organization in North America, announced that they were going to refuse to allow a BDS resolution to even be discussed or sent forward. And it was the same thing. They cited anti-BDS laws, right? So it's this kind of like, well, we'd like to help you. We don't like genocide, but our hands are tied. The law, what can we do? So, how do we, so like in a sense, there's two questions. One is how do we come at the laws, which are themselves unjust? And the second is how do we come at the kind of, framing of these laws by administrators to go way beyond what the laws are even allowed to do?
Yeah. These things look really official, right? This is the proclamation from Andrew Cuomo in 2016, Executive Order 157. What it does is it sets up a list of institutions which have declared their intent to engage in BDS or aided others in engaging in BDS or called upon others to engage in BDS. And if you're on that list, the state and its agencies are required to divest from someone on that list, right? So I want to just tell you a quick story about this resolution. Some years ago, I was organizing with some friends across the city, and we were thinking about engaging in a BDS campaign where we would talk to local bodega owners who might be selling Israeli products and ask them sort of why they were selling those products. Is it that they were so good and they couldn't afford to not sell them? What about alternative products that were just as good? What would you do? And would you be okay with us putting stickers on those products if you had to sell them, right? Multiple bodegas said to us as we did the sort of survey, we would do that, but we're worried about the executive order. We're worried about the BDS. I said, how the hell do you know about the executive order? And they said, well, multiple people said this to me. Some people came into the store and were looking to see if we sold these products and said that, if not, that we would get in trouble because we're whatever. So I said, excuse me? So as part, I went and sort of did some just gumshoe research on the executive order. And I was like, that doesn't seem like, it doesn't have a Gestapo element to the order. So I don't know who these people are that are coming to their bodegas. So I actually called the Office of General Services, who is responsible for administering the order. You can look up the list online. The list is quite short. It's probably like 15 or 20 banking institutions that have declared their intent to BDS. And I said, is this you guys? And they said affirmatively, no, this is not us, right? So if someone is out there knocking on your door and saying, hey, you better sell Sabra or we're coming for you, it's not the state somehow, right? It's someone who's pretending to be the state. And that's because, and the person went on to explain to me, that the executive order targets institutions that the state is putting money in, hoping that the money grows. Invest, right, as it says in the executive order. So if it's a bank, if it's some sort of fund, if it's bonds, if it's whatever, if that institution has an investment in it, and that institution indicates that it intends to engage in BDS, then the state and its agencies are required to divest money from that institution. I haven't heard Citibank yet, declaring its intent to engage in BDS. I haven't heard many banking institutions here expressing that intent. When the state sends its money to CUNY, it doesn't expect it back. Right? Not, at least not in kind. And that's because it's not an investment. So the executive order does not apply to us, right? And yet the governor and so many others, even Judge Lippman in the report, point to the executive order and say things like, the chancellor has made it clear that CUNY does not support and in fact cannot participate in BDS activities and is required, and then what they say is, and is required by New York State executive order to divest its money from institutions which are engaged in BDS. That's true, but you see the sleight of hand, right? And so ultimately, the first step to your question, Tony, is to get a good understanding for what your executive order says or what the anti-BDS law in your jurisdiction says. Ours does not restrict us, to my mind, at least on my reading of it and on the reading of the guy that I talked to at the Office of General Services, does not restrict us from engaging in that sort of policy. And there, Laura Friedman at the Foundation for Middle East Peace, if you look her account up on Twitter, she actually has a really good like state-by-state analysis of anti-BDS legislation. There is some anti-BDS legislation which would target an institution like CUNY. New York's is not that one. Texas, I heard someone whisper, is that one. And, you know, Just Vision made a really great film about this called Boycott, which I encourage folks to see. But this executive order was designed as a boogeyman, right? To spook folks from doing the kinds of things that Tony was talking about. And it was designed as such, not because of the goodness of Andrew Cuomo's heart. Pause for laughter. But because there are real concerns about what the First Amendment would have to say about the other kind of executive order. And New York doesn't want to be seen, remember Notorious RBG, right? New York doesn't want to be seen as the kind of state that is restricting those sorts of First Amendment liberties. And so they came up to the line, but they decided that they weren't even going to try and cross it. They're just going to wield it as if they're doing so. So becoming knowledgeable about that is really important. I think if you're an institution that's thinking about doing this and you're concerned about finger wagging from someone higher up, I would go to an institution like the New York Civil Liberties Union or the ACLU or the Knight Foundation at Columbia or FIRE or one of these institutions and ask them for a read of this executive order and what it actually says and what it doesn't say, and have that in your back pocket. You can pass it along. You don't have to have one for each CUNY school. Let's just, you know, I bet, you know, let's talk. And so having that read in your back pocket at the very least is an answer to someone who is saying that this can't be done. And then, you know, after you've sort of crossed those T's and dotted those I's, then you can decide what to do and whether or not the institution will deliberately misread the executive order as against the effort. But to my mind, like having a clear sense of what the statute, or in this case, not statute, but executive order says is really, really important.
Do you have other resources? I mean, it's a letter from Friedman.
I think I would look there. NICLU actually has, sorry, the ACLU has some good resources on the question of boycott. And I think the film Boycott, if you go check out the film's website, there are some really good resources there on this question.
Yeah, that's so helpful. Thank you, Tarek, for that. Maybe I would just add that I think just to build on your point about how much these laws are intended to have that chilling effect, and they rely on our ignorance as well. So yes, I really I so much appreciate, Tarek, that you are reminding us to educate ourselves. We're academics. We should know how to read and ask questions and really engage, sit with the text. And then educate ourselves and arm ourselves in that way so that we can educate others. Because I think part of the ways that the Israeli state and its Zionist supporters here in this country have operated for a very long time is through sort of magnetizing their size and making us feel as though the stakes of speaking out on Palestine are higher than they actually are, and making it feel as though the laws and the full force of the state will come down on us. And in this last year, we have seen that to be true to some extent, but there's way more freedom and room to, there's a gap there, right? And I think we have to exploit that and to be courageous and to encourage our colleagues and peers to be courageous, also by engaging with the facts and educating ourselves and others. But I think, you know, yeah, certainly this last year, we know why this is happening, right? There has been a sea change in higher education. We're seeing that, I think, more maybe it's crystallized in some ways, or it's more apparent than in other spaces. But we see that change with young people in this country, right? That it's not just a recognition, a broad recognition of what we are all being told routinely by the American media that is not happening, but we all know to be true, which is that there is a genocide being waged for well over a year now. But also there is a real there's a rejection of Zionism as a legitimate political project, which is this is a sea change in we're seeing this with our students. And so I think, of course, we are anticipating that in response to that, in the absence of any sort of political, ideological legitimacy, that all that is left is brute force. And so that is what we are seeing. But the other way to look at it, of course, is that we are on the path to victory, right? And I think that we have to hold on to that and keep going.
Yeah, that was beautiful. That like dialectic there at the end was really beautiful. And like this notion of, I mean, I think I will just say, as someone who's been doing this for a long time, watching the way that students, including graduate students, have really broken through the fear barrier, right? Which has really been, you know, more than anything else. I mean, like the repression is real, the cops are real, but that fear barrier, right? I mean, I think has been broken through, and you can't put that back in the bottle once that's come. We have one more question. It's not actually 2:15, by the way, if you're looking at the clock. We have a good, like, almost an hour left. But we have one more question we're going to talk about, and then we're going to open it up. Actually, we're going to first hear from some of the grad student organizers here in the building, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And, you know, we wanted to sort of bring it to the moment. So, you know, the book came out before this magnificent outpouring of solidarity represented by the encampment movement here at CUNY, at so many places. And then also the increasing unprecedented campus repression we've seen over the past year, especially this fall. Could you both talk some about the challenges, but also the openings of organizing for Palestine liberation in higher education, and also how this organizing could connect with BDS campaigns and other Palestine liberation movements outside the university?
Yeah. Challenges and openings. I think all of us are having these conversations right now. I'm sure many of us, and I think we have to keep having them because they require some deep thinking, I think, and strategizing at this time, not only in the wake of the encampments, but also with what's ahead of us. But I think I had the privilege, really. Can you hear me in the back? Sorry. I had really the honor of being at a lot of encampments over the past year, and speaking with. Still no? Better? Speaking with faculty and student organizers, visiting encampments. And I think that, to my mind, there are two sort of major wins that have already come out of this encampment movement and the student intifada. And I think that are really remarkable, that we have to really build on in the year ahead and as we continue our organizing. And the first, I think, really is that they have definitively undermined the Palestine exception, I think in a way that cannot be and will not be reversed. It was really remarkable to see the libraries that were built across the encampments, right, with texts and books that are excluded from our institutional libraries, the syllabi and the political education materials put together by students that include writing and critique of Palestinians that have been deemed for so long beyond the pale of acceptable discourse and have totally been erased and sort of excluded very intentionally from the canon. And really just also speech itself, student and faculty and staff speech that was really, for so long, really deemed outside the bounds of acceptable discourse in the Western university and the U.S. university in particular, where, you know, as Umayya Cable and others put it, there is such a compulsory Zionism that is really seeped into the culture of our institutions. So that will no longer stand. There's no going back from that. That has been shattered by the students, and I think that is just remarkable. And there's no going back, and there's only moving forward and building from that. And the second, I think, really valuable thing that has come out of the encampments, but also the response, and this is sort of speaks to both the challenge and the opportunity, which is that the encampments really exposed and laid bare, I think, in new ways, or in more apparent ways, the ways that our institutions are violent. And I think PACB's analysis has always, I think, been so valuable because it has attended to structure, and it has pointed out not only the structural violence and imbrication with colonial violence of the Israeli university system, but also of our own. It has offered us a window to understand the coloniality, the enduring coloniality of our own institutions, and the ways in which our own universities are deeply embedded in colonial and state systems of violence. And I think that has been really important. That has been an important insight that was new to many people, right, outside of our movement space, and I think that's really valuable. And so what does it really mean? I think one question that I've been thinking about and sitting with is, you know, what does it mean when we, for those of us inhabiting and reproducing the U.S. university, what does it mean to really take as a starting point of our collective organizing, not only for Palestine, but more broadly, that our universities are deeply violent institutions? I think that is an incredibly valuable political insight that the students have offered us, and I think that it is really important for the struggle ahead. And you know, as we head into a second Trump term, you know, I keep on, and I'm sure many of us saw the organizers chanting on the streets of Cairo, right? Palestine is not, we are not liberating Palestine. Palestine is liberating us, right? So I think about that all the time. It has since been echoed, of course, from Cairo to, you know, across. It is no less true for us here. And I think, you know, it is really clear in this moment, not only that those of us who are enablers of this genocide through our own, in the heart of the U.S. imperial core, right? Not only is it absolutely urgent that we recommit to the struggle for Palestinian liberation, but that it is only through our commitment to the struggle for liberation, Palestinian liberation, that we ourselves on our own campuses will be free. So I think that is a moment.
Have to follow that. Yeah. So maybe a couple of challenges and a couple opportunities. I think one challenge that that the past spring really exposed something that Professor David Posen has called the presidentialization of the university, right? The extent to which power has been centralized at the university level, whether it's at the individual institution or a broader university level, in decision makers, faculty governance seems to be something of the past, right? Faculty just work here sort of ethos has captured many of the institutions, and that feels like a challenge. I don't know that it's a product of the past spring, but it's certainly something that the past spring exposed. And I think it bears emphasizing, therefore, how important it is for us to take seriously the role of faculty governance of our institutions, that in fact, we don't just work here. These are our communities that we're a part of. We don't need to defer to students alone to make the political decisions for what's important and what's not. We can work in tandem with them. We can often be led by them. But we often, as faculty and staff, have an onus to also lead and put our necks out when we can. So that feels important to emphasize, and something that I've taken away. The second challenge, maybe this is a little bit trite, but time feels like a real challenge. The degree to which the encampments shut down at the end of the spring semester and the rules changed over the summer is shocking. The extent to which students moved quickly, but administrations moved just as quickly to tamp down the kind of pushback that students put forward is something that I think only re-emphasizes the importance of our role as people who are here for more than 2 or 3 or 4 years to do what we can to sort of be the voices that keep the choir going. So those are some challenges. I think a bridge challenge / opening is labor. I think that what we've seen in terms of labor's increasing militancy around Palestine has been really inspiring, and labor's increasing militancy at academic institutions has been especially inspiring. I think the reason it's a challenge is because we're staring down the barrel of a Trump presidency. And so to the extent that labor stands to be severely limited, it only reemphasizes, I think, the importance of organizing on that front. And then finally, I think another opening is I think that the election really exposed a widening of the aperture beyond what we expected in terms of what people are willing to vote for and tolerate. So to the extent you started by talking about how we actually need to turn and sort of join hands with liberals or whatever. Pinkies maybe. But I think I agree with you. And in fact, I think that the aperture for what's possible in that joinder seems to be something new. There is an opportunity here for us to think about joining together causes and issues that previously seemed so incredibly disparate. And so I think that that opportunity is one that we should really seize as well.
Speaking of seizing the opportunity, now we're going to open it. So I'm going to first invite up a couple of the organizers of the GGSC resolution. Bravo. Who will give us a quick update, and then I'm going to turn it to Gary for Q&A.
Hi, I'm Lucian. I'm a student in the urban education program, and I want to talk briefly about 2 different resolutions that the DGSC passed at our last plenary. And the DGSC is the student government body here at the Graduate Center. So the first resolution is a resolution in support of the 5 demands of the CUNY Gaza Solidarity Encampment. The 5 demands were modeled off the 5 demands of the 1969 takeover at City College, and they're an expansive vision for Palestinian solidarity and liberation here at CUNY. So they include everything from the demilitarization of CUNY, getting cops off campus and also out of the surrounding community in Harlem, as well as a free CUNY, a strong contract for the PSC, and of course, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So this resolution actualizes and materially enforces a previous DGSC resolution passed in 2016 for an academic boycott by taking the DGSC budget, which is, I think, around $700,000 a year, and making that subject to BDS. And the second resolution that we passed, very connected to that, is in support of the removal of Starbucks products from the Graduate Center. Amidst the genocide at the beginning of this semester, the Graduate Center administration and Aladdin, the dining services that they contract with, decided to put Starbucks products in our cafe on the lobby and in the 8th floor dining commons, which is really an affront to all the organizing of students and workers in this building that got us food access in the building after it was shut down during the pandemic. So these two resolutions are a way that the DGSC has stood in solidarity with Palestine, fighting for a free CUNY. And now I'll turn it over to Simone to talk about some of the backlash to that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Simone Parker. I'm an Earth and Environmental Sciences student in my third year at the Graduate Center, and I'm also the co-chair of business at the DGSC. And I was elected as part of a larger slate that has advocated for the 5 demands and BDS and to push forward what kind of space we want the Graduate Center to be. And we manage a very, modest budget of around $700,000. And it's humble within the wider CUNY system, but our humble resources have been a point of ire for administration that have characterized our resolution and our work as niche, minority opinion, and conflicting, disruptive, and conflicting with their interpretation of the executive order of BDS. We feel a sense of urgency that the DGSC's autonomy is actively being threatened by Graduate Center administration and CUNY Central. And this characterization that they've made around our executive order or around our resolution does not fit with the outpouring of student support that I've received, that they are proud that we have taken a different stance, we have taken a stance towards a free CUNY and towards the 5 demands. And it doesn't align with what I've seen on CUNY's campus as somebody closely working alongside other students. And what students have said they're proud of is that we have identified that Palestinian liberation is deeply intertwined with what it means to be a people's CUNY. So as faculty, what I ask of you is that we have a petition going around to get support and sign on so that we can say, look, this is not niche. This is actually deeply ingrained with who we are as Graduate Center students and CUNY students. And it's not just the petition, I'll send around a piece of paper, but it's also, we would love to hear faculty reaching out. And as Tarek had mentioned, saying, what can you do to work in tandem with us? How can we partner together on this? Because faculty are not just people that work here. You have a say. This is your university too, or this is your place of work too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Evan Rothman. I am a graduate student here at the Grad Center in the History Department. I am also co-chair of the Graduate Center chapter of the Professional Staff Congress, our union here at CUNY for faculty and staff. I want to spend a minute talking about one of those other institutions in addition to the Academy, which I think has already gotten a few shout outs this evening, and that is labor. I think in a number of ways, it's been heartening and inspiring to see the solidarity coming, especially from rank and file workers, union workers with Palestine and against genocide. But we also know that there is a lot of violence that the labor movement historically and in the present has enacted, a renunciation of solidarity. And there, I'm glad to say, a number of efforts underway, both here at CUNY by the PSC and other unions around the country to reverse that. So what I'm talking about concretely is the chapter here, Graduate Center chapter, passed a resolution at our most recent meeting at the end of October to do a number of things related to divestment, right? So answering the call of both Palestinian organizers as well as our encampment organizers here at CUNY to divest from Israeli apartheid, to divest from genocide. And so our resolution, which will be brought to the full delegate assembly of the union, that's our representative body, in a couple of weeks, and most likely be debated and voted on in December. And this resolution would do a number of things. First of all, it would send a letter. It would direct our principal officers of the union to send a letter to the Teacher Retirement Service of New York City, which is where, for most PSC members, although not grad students because we don't have pensions, but for everybody else who does have a pension, they're invested with TRS. TRS has about, what, $200 billion in holdings? Is that? All right. Yeah, $200 billion with a B. Of that, about 200 million, about 100 million is invested in Israel bonds as well as in Israeli companies through various sort of mutual funds and other things. I'm not the expert on that. And that's to say nothing of, firms like Boeing and other parts of the military industrial complex, which are deeply invested in the genocide, but which are not, for now, the targets of this specific resolution. It would also direct our union to divest its own funds from apartheid and to form a committee to investigate that further. So there is going to be a sign up going around, I think, which we're sort of consolidating DGSC and PSC organizing on this front. So please sign up. We will be sending along more information about ways to get activated. We know that there's going to be a fight around this, both right at the Grad Center, but also in our union. And we know that we need to be organized in order to fight back. We need to be organized. So we will please sign up and we will be following up more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is also a good segue to say that after the event, and we still have a good 35 or so minutes for discussion. After this event, there will be a reception up on the 5th floor. I hope some of the folks who just spoke will stick around. So if you want to kind of have a conversation, time for that.
Recording
5109
stopped.
is where it will be, where you could just follow us or just look for the wine. Okay, we're going to go to Q&A.
Some
we
empty
have
seats
folks.
now, I think, so.
Yeah, and there are. Come sit. Come. Yeah, if you've
Those who
stayed,
are
if you're.
standing.
Sir. Thank you for the reminder. We to facilitate so people feel maybe better able to speak. Just to be clear, we're going to stop the live stream and we're not going to record. So the first part of the event with the speakers was recorded. So just to be clear, if you come up and ask a question, you're not being live streamed or recorded. And I think we have folks with microphones who are going to kind of come around the room. Maybe we'll take maybe 3 questions at a time and go like that. Okay. Oops, I kicked my. I do that when I teach all the time. Are you up to ask a question? Oh, you're just looking up. It's off, I think.
Questions